The first leg of the journey began along the Missouri River, where Independence, Missouri served as a common starting point. There, families like yours would find other travelers exchanging news, supplies, and sometimes even family members. Then the journey truly started. Covered wagons creaked and groaned under the weight of dreams. Oxen and horses snorted, sensing the long journey ahead. And as the wagons rumbled forward, one by one, they vanished from sight, swallowed by the tall grasses of the prairie. Let's hop in the wagon and imagine our family's daily routine on the Oregon Trail. We're here to experience it firsthand. Just like you, we've carefully packed our virtual wagon with tools, provisions, and clothing for this journey. Now the sky is big and open above us, but the inside of this wagon is cramped and hot. Mom sits beside me, patiently sewing while Dad studies a map, looking for the best route. My little sister leans against my brother, both gazing out at the endless fields rushing past. Our dog snoozes beneath our table, resting between chores. Every day on the trail was unique, a blend of the mundane and the unexpected. Mornings began with chores. Someone had to get water, someone else had to feed the animals. Then there was the business of breaking camp, packing up, raising the canvas, and hitching the oxen or horses. Breakfast might be eggs with bread or porridge, sometimes bacon if we're lucky. After eating, Dad checked the wagon again for supplies, then led the team forward. Travel was the heart of each day. We moved for hours, usually walking alongside the wagon. When it got to hot, we took turns driving, sitting on a wagon seat high above everything, holding the reins and guiding the team with a flick of the whip. Sometimes we raced, other times we walked. Along the way, we looked for berries or herbs that we could use for tea or flavoring. In the evenings, when the oxen were unhitched and camp was set, we gathered around the fire. Meals were simple, lots of beans, dried meat, flour bread, but always savory and filling. As twilight deepened, shadows stretched long, and the prairie, alive with crickets and owls, became a bit scary. Once everyone was tucked inside the wagon, bedtime meant snuggling close to Mom and Dad in the dim lamplight, listening to stories or singing songs until sleep came softly, wrapped in the comforting sounds of the trail. Let's talk about a major part of traveling on the Oregon Trail, finding food. The journey was tough, lasting months and covering over 2,000 miles. People had to make sure they had enough to eat throughout the trip. Hunting and fishing played a big role. Along the way, settlers hunted wild animals such as deer, antelope, and buffalo, or caught fish in rivers and streams. However, most of their food consisted of dried goods like flour, dried fruit, and salted meat, which they brought with them. These foods could last a long time, but they weren't very exciting. Imagine eating the same things every day, month after month. That's why some settlers grew tired of trail food and started trading with Native Americans. They traded flour, sugar, tobacco, and other items for fresh produce, including corn, potatoes, and tomatoes. This helped them add variety to their diets and made the journey a bit more bearable. Now, hunting and trading were risky. Settlers sometimes had to venture far from the safety of their wagon trains to find food. They also had to be careful when dealing with Native Americans, as not all tribes were friendly. Nonetheless, these activities were essential for survival on the Oregon Trail. So the next time you sit down to a meal, think about how lucky you are to have a variety of delicious foods to choose from. The journey on the Oregon Trail was fraught with challenges, but the camaraderie forged among the travelers was a bright spot in the darkness. Many pioneers traveled in groups known as wagon trains for safety. The largest of these trains numbered in the thousands, providing a sense of community and collective strength. Men would often work together to mend broken wagons or care for oxen, sharing their skills and resources. Women would gather at evening to cook meals and exchange news, creating a network of support and friendship. and children, when not helping with chores, formed their own playgroups, finding amusement in the midst of hardship. It is important to note that the difficulties faced by travelers on the Oregon Trail were often compounded by the presence of disease. Conditions inside the wagons were often unsanitary, and deadly diseases like cholera and dysentery spread easily. The lack of proper medical care meant that many settlers had to rely on wives, children, and neighbors to help with their illnesses. The isolation and stress of the journey also took a toll on mental health. Travelers often grappled with loneliness, fear, and grief, making the journey not only a physical challenge, but an emotional one as well. Despite these hardships, the spirit of community on the Oregon Trail was a testament to the resilience and adaptability of the human spirit. In the face of danger and uncertainty, these pioneers found comfort and strength in each other, proving that even in the harshest environments, the bonds of humanity can endure. So now let's explore some of the biggest dangers faced by those on the Oregon Trail. One of the greatest threats was the terrain itself. Imagine our wagon bumping and swaying over rough, rocky paths. Rivers swelled, turning what was once a trail into a raging torrent. Sometimes the ground was so uneven that it felt like we were on a roller coaster. To make matters worse, constant jolting motion could toss a person out of the wagon and break bones. Other times, the trail turned into thick, sticky mud. The oxen would sink, struggling to pull the heavy wagons out. And when they couldn't move, settlers had to get out and push. The terrain demanded constant alertness and quick thinking, making every mile on the Oregon Trail feel like a thrilling adventure. Another danger was the unpredictable nature of the journey. Storms could strike suddenly, drenching travelers and damaging their belongings. Snow and ice threatened to stall the wagons, while scorching sun beat down, making dehydration a constant concern. Being stuck in a blizzard or a rainstorm for days could lead to illness and death. Wagoners had to adapt to these changes quickly, adjusting their schedule, conserving water, and even changing routes to avoid impassable terrain. This unpredictability meant that no 2 days were the same, and travelers had to be ready for anything. Lastly, there were more tangible dangers that lurked along the trail. Accidents with oxen or horses could lead to injuries or even trampling. Bandits, though rare, posed a threat to the settlers' safety and their possessions. And perhaps the most terrifying of all, disease spread easily in the close quarters of the wagon train, causing sickness and sometimes death. Life on the Oregon Trail was a constant battle against the elements, the landscape, and even fate itself. It was a test of endurance, resourcefulness, and courage. In this harsh environment, travelers had to be prepared for anything. Now let's return to our family's journey on the Oregon Trail. After weeks or even months on the trail, the sights and sounds of civilization begin to stir in the distance. The rhythm of life changes. The end of the journey is near. As the final wagon wheels roll into the Willamette Valley, a mix of emotions fills the air. Relief and joy mingle with the weariness of the long journey. The valley seems to sigh with the weight of dreams finally reached. It's a place where rivers wind through fertile lands, where mountains stand as silent witnesses to history. It's a place where the journey has ended, but a new chapter is just beginning. So what happens now? What will our family do next? The arrival at the end of the Oregon Trail marks the end of one journey, but it's also the beginning of another. The pioneers who made it to the Willamette Valley in the mid-1800s were greeted by a land full of promise and potential. The fertile soil and mild climate of the region made it ideal for farming and ranching. Many settlers, weary from their travels, chose to start small, planting crops and raising livestock on the very land that had sustained their journey. Others, with dreams of adventure still in their hearts, ventured further into the Oregon Territory, seeking to carve out new homesteads or perhaps even strike it rich in the burgeoning fields of mining or lumber. The spirit of community that had sustained them on the trail didn't disappear with their arrival. In fact, it often grew stronger. churches and schools sprang up, providing not just places of worship and learning, but also centers for social life and mutual support. The hard work of building a new life brought people together, forging bonds that were as strong as the mountains that cradled their valley. Life at the end of the Oregon Trail wasn't without its challenges. The settlers had to contend with the region's Native American tribes, some of whom had lived there for centuries. Conflicts over land and resources were inevitable. Additionally, the dream of easy prosperity on the frontier was often shattered by harsh realities. Farming on the rich volcanic soils was hard and unforgiving. The isolation and distance from markets made selling their produce a challenge. And the specter of disease and injury loomed large in their new homes. Despite these challenges, the pioneers pressed on, driven by the belief that this land, with its rolling hills and whispering rivers, held the promise of a better life. And for many, it did. The Oregon Trail remains a powerful symbol of the American spirit of exploration, adventure, and the relentless pursuit of opportunity. While most of us today will never experience the hardships of a wagon train journey, we can still appreciate the courage and determination of those who did. Their story is a reminder of the power of the human spirit and the lengths to which people will go to create a better life for themselves and their families. Before we start, I'd like to thank our sponsor for this video, Masterworks. The year is 1847, and you are a settler traveling west on the Oregon Trail. Your destination, the Willamette Valley in present-day Oregon Territory. You have heard the stories, the families who never arrived, the harsh winters that froze travelers in place, the illnesses that spread like wildfire. Still, the call of a new life, of freedom and possibility is stronger. The vast majority of people who traveled west along the Oregon Trail did so because they wanted to become farmers. Many of them were motivated by a desire to own land. By the mid-1800s, large parts of the United States were heavily populated, and a lot of people found it difficult to acquire property where they lived. Western lands promised cheap or even free acreage, providing an opportunity for people to own a piece of the American dream. It's important to understand that the Oregon Trail was more than just a path for farmers. It was also a route for merchants, missionaries, miners, and adventurers. Each group had its own reasons for making the trek. Missionaries, for example, felt called to spread Christianity to Native American tribes in the West. Miners dreamed of striking gold or silver, inspired by the rumors and occasional discoveries that dotted the frontier. Merchants sought new markets and opportunities to supply the growing settlements in Oregon and beyond. But regardless of their motivations, all travelers faced the same hard reality of the trail. Imagine a young couple setting out with a few barrels of food, a small wagon, and nothing but hope. Their families had warned them against it. Their neighbors doubted their plans, but they were determined. For them, the trail was a test of faith and resolve. Perhaps they dreamed of a farm nestled amidst rolling hills, a place where they could raise their future children. But right now, all they have is each other and a shared vision of a better life. As they stood at the starting point of their journey, they knew that what lay ahead was fraught with challenges. They had heard tales of the hardships that awaited them, the scorching heat of the desert, the freezing cold of mountain passes, the constant threat of disease, and the ever-present danger of violent encounters with Native Americans. Despite these stories, they were ready to face whatever came their way. They had prepared for months, if not years, for this moment. They had carefully selected the time of year to start their trip, ensuring that they wouldn't be caught in the worst of the elements. They had packed their wagon with essential supplies, food, tools, and medicines, and they had made sure their animals were strong and ready for the long journey. With a deep breath, they hitched up their oxen and began the slow trek westward. The wheels of their wagon creaked, carrying with them the weight of their hopes and dreams. Theirs was just one of many stories that played out along the Oregon Trail. Among those who dared to venture into the untamed wilderness was a single mother named Elizabeth. She had been widowed just a year ago and was left to care for her 3 young children alone. Her husband, Thomas, had been one of the many who perished during the winter of 1827, succumbing to the brutal cold and becoming another name on the list of those who didn't make it. Undeterred by the dangers and with little prospects in the East, Elizabeth decided to follow her brother-in-law's footsteps. He had joined the steady stream of pioneers heading west to Oregon Territory. Inspired by his adventurous spirit, she decided to take the same path, hoping for a better life on the other side of the continent. The journey was arduous and unforgiving. Elizabeth and her children faced hunger and thirst, exhaustion and despair, but through it all, they pressed on. Elizabeth, driven by the love for her children and the memory of her late husband, refused to give up. There were moments when the trail seemed endless, stretching before them like a yellow ribbon unfurling into the infinite horizon. There were times when the wagon wheels felt like they would crumble under the strain, and days when the sky offered no solace from the relentless sun. Yet through it all, they kept moving forward. Just as Elizabeth's resolve was tested every step of the way, so was the strength of her children. They learned quickly that life on the trail was harsh and unforgiving. The youngest, Thomas, named after his late father, knew that he had to grow up fast. At the age of 12, he was already helping his mother with chores, assisting in cooking meals, collecting firewood, and caring for the younger children. His older sister, Mary, was known for her bravery and kindness. At the age of 10, she was responsible for looking after little Martha. When their mother was busy, Mary would entertain her younger sister with stories and games, helping her forget the hardships that surrounded them. But the journey was not just about enduring, it was also about discovery. The beauty of the natural world unfolded before them, painting a canvas of wonder and awe. The towering peaks of the Rocky Mountains, the vast expanse of the Great Plains, the thundering power of the Yellowstone River, all left an indelible mark on their young minds. They saw wildlife that they had only heard about in stories, herds of bison thundering across the prairie, majestic bald eagles soaring overhead, and the playful antics of prairie dogs peeking from their burrows. These experiences fostered a deep sense of adventure and curiosity in the children, shaping their perspectives and preparing them for the adventures that lay ahead. As Elizabeth and her children continued their journey, they encountered other pioneers who had embarked on similar quests for a better life. Some were seasoned travelers, their faces weathered by years of hardship, their eyes twinkling with tales of adventure and resilience. Others were young families, their faces etched with determination, their spirits buoyed by dreams of a future filled with promise. Through shared stories and experiences around flickering campfires, Elizabeth and her children learned about the challenges that lay ahead, the harsh realities of life on the frontier, and the importance of community in the face of adversity. These encounters left an impact on the children, instilling in them the values of resilience, adaptability, and the importance of human connection. Their journey continued until finally they reached the lush Willamette Valley, a sight that brought tears to Elizabeth's eyes. Here, rolling hills carpeted with vibrant green contrasted with the rugged mountains they had just traversed. The valley was a tapestry of nature's bounty, dotted with farms, meandering rivers, and the promise of a new beginning. The children, too, were filled with a sense of accomplishment and wonder. Reaching the valley was a testament to their mother's strength and their own resilience. It symbolized a triumph over the hardships they had endured, a victory against the unforgiving terrain and the cruel whims of fate. Standing at the edge of the valley, Elizabeth knew that their journey was far from over. Establishing a life here would be another challenge, taming the wilderness, building a home, and carving out a place in a new community. But as she looked at her children, their faces flushed with excitement, their eyes sparkling with the spirit of adventure, she knew they were ready. They had faced the trials of the Oregon Trail together and emerged stronger, more resilient, and more determined. Their story, like many others, was a testament to the indomitable spirit of the human will, the pursuit of dreams, and the unwavering bond of a family. However, not all journeys along the Oregon Trail were marked by such optimism. The harsh realities of the trail often turned the dreams of settlers into nightmares. One such nightmare was the incident at Burnt River Massacre, which occurred in present-day Oregon in 1864. The incident serves as a stark reminder of the darker side of westward expansion, shedding light on the complexities and brutality that accompanied the journey along the Oregon Trail. The story of the Burnt River Massacre involves the tragic loss of life among the wagon train of settlers led by James E. McCrae. Their goal was to reach the Willamette Valley, but their journey took a horrifying turn when they were attacked by a group of Native Americans near the Malheur River. What followed was a brutal confrontation that resulted in the deaths of numerous settlers, including women and children. This event was a tragic consequence of the escalating tensions between settlers and Native Americans as both groups vie for land and resources in the Oregon Territory. The massacre was a pivotal moment in the history of the region, leaving a lasting impact on the relationship between settlers and indigenous populations. It highlights the cost of westward expansion and the brutal realities that often accompany such pursuits. This dark chapter in history serves as a somber reminder of the challenges and sacrifices made by those who ventured onto the Oregon Trail and helps us understand the complexities of the westward expansion in America. The Oregon Trail was a journey of immense challenges and sacrifices, but also of dreams and aspirations. Whether you were a seasoned traveler or a newcomer, the trail demanded respect and resilience. But it also offered the promise of a new life, a chance to own land, build a business, or simply escape the crowded cities of the East. So, what will your story be? Will you be the pioneering family seeking a piece of land to call their own? A fortune hunter searching for gold in the untamed wilderness, or a missionary venturing into the unknown to spread the word of God? How will you react to the hardships that await you? Will you stand firm, adapt to the challenges, or succumb to the unforgiving terrain? Remember, every choice you make will shape your destiny along the Oregon Trail. Masterworks is an investing platform that allows everyday people to invest in multi-million-dollar art from legendary artists like Picasso and Banksy. They start by sourcing the very best contemporary art they can find from iconic artists. Then they break it up into smaller fractions, allowing investors like you to buy in at a lower price point. So far, their investors have collectively earned millions of dollars, and since 2017, every Masterworks sale has returned a profit to its investors. The artwork they have sold includes a 95% return on investment. So there has never been a better time to get started. And that's a $100 value. Join the hundreds of thousands of people that have signed up to invest in Masterworks today. Why would anyone want to travel thousands of miles across an unsettled continent with little more than a wagon train full of pioneers and oxen? Well, put simply, because there was nothing else. Not at least without being willing to live the rest of your life planting cotton or picking it in the brothels of New Orleans. The antebellum South had very little appeal for most Americans, even if it meant spending a decade in the wilderness. And unless you happened to be rich enough to buy one of those fancy steamboats, traveling east was impossible. Stagecoach roads simply couldn't support that kind of traffic, and most rivers were unnavigable by anything larger than a flatboat. Even then, running aground was a real possibility. But trails like the Oregon Trail provided a solution. They may not have been paved with gold, but for many people, they were paved with the promise of an affordable farm and a chance at home ownership. But what really makes the Oregon Trail stand out is the fact that the United States government encouraged people to take this dangerous journey most of the time. That's right, as enticing as Manifest Destiny was as a philosophy, it didn't mean much without a road to get there. So beginning in 1841, the government began issuing land grants to anyone who successfully reached Oregon Territory, an area claimed by both Britain and America. This policy helped swell the ranks of pioneers, turning a trickle of explorers and fur traders into a flood of settlers. But there was also the political backdrop to consider. In the 1840s, tensions between the United States and Great Britain over the Oregon Territory meant that American settlers' presence was also a statement of sovereignty. The more Americans who moved west, the stronger the country's claim to the land. This added a layer of national pride and urgency to the migration. Families were not just seeking new homes. They were part of a larger story of a nation expanding its borders and ideals. But none of these reasons made the trail easier. For every success story, there were countless tales of struggle, wagons breaking down far from any help, food supplies dwindling to nearly nothing, the slow, heartbreaking loss of family members to disease and accidents, the vast loneliness of nights spent under unfamiliar stars with only the crackling fire and the distant howls of wolves for company. We've already touched on some of these difficulties before, but it is worth remembering that most travelers were amateurs when it came to things like driving oxen or cooking outdoors. They were farmers and shopkeepers and cobblers, not mountain men. And the reality of their situation only hit them once they were several months into their journey. At best, they were self-sufficient. At worst, they were completely lost. Let's start with the wagons, which might seem like an odd place to begin. After all, they were usually sturdy four-wheeled Conestogas built by professional wagoners. But here's the thing, you couldn't just buy one of those. You needed to rent one. And wagon companies charged top dollar for their equipment. The average cost was around $200 per wagon, and that was just the beginning. If something broke, you were on your own, parts were hard to come by, and blacksmiths rarer still. It was a very real possibility that a traveler could lose control of their wagon through no fault of their own. Imagine renting a car today and then finding out you're responsible for fixing it if anything breaks. Yeah, it sucks, but at least you can pull over at a gas station for a bit of human contact. The nearest jail was probably weeks away for most pioneers. Now, of course, you could bring your own wagon, and some people did, but that required owning a team of oxen or horses strong enough to pull it. And raising such a team took years, especially in places like Illinois, where farms were usually too small to keep a large herd. Then there was the problem of food. You could survive for a while on what you carried with you, but eventually you'd need to restock. There wasn't much of a grocery store industry in the Midwest at the time, and general stores rarely carried staples like flour and sugar. This meant travelers usually had two options, hunting and fishing or foraging. Hunting was difficult since most settlers could shoot straight, and game was becoming scarce thanks to market hunting. Trappers and hunters alike were taking as much as they could, then moving on before anything could recover. This left foraging as the primary source of nutrition for most travelers. And there's a reason we say that pioneers subsisted on berries and wild onions. They're easy to gather and nutritious, especially compared to the alternatives. Safe fruit was basically non-existent west of Illinois, meaning most travelers were surviving on dried meat and flour, neither of which tastes great after a few months. Of course, you could hunt big game and preserve it, but ranching wasn't easy on the trail. Then there was the problem of disease. Cholera was particularly nasty and common, but typhoid fever was also a constant threat, especially among children. Diarrhea and dysentery were also extremely common. Basically, anything that could spoil food was spoiling it and people along with it. Finally, there were the accidents. Wagon wheels don't maintain themselves and oxen get spooked easily. Throw in a few mountain lions for good measure and you have a recipe for disaster. If you were unlucky enough to break a leg, your fate was grim. Antibiotics wouldn't be invented for another century, and gangrene was widespread. Amputation was painful and risky, but staying still and waiting for it to spread was even worse. It was almost easier to die on the trail than to survive it. But let's say you avoided all these pitfalls. Let's assume your wagon never broke, your food never spoiled, and you never got sick. Well, you still might have died. That's because Mother Nature was always ready to step in and snuff out your miserable existence. In other words, the terrain itself was unforgiving. The further west you went, the less hospitable the environment became. The vast plains gave way to towering mountains, forcing travelers to choose between a long detour or a harrowing climb. Summers were hot and winters colder than most people expected. Storms could arrive suddenly and last for days, burying travelers in snow or washing away entire sections of the trail. But the real killer was the isolation. No matter how long you traveled, you might not see another person for weeks at a time. Eventually, it wore on your mind and body in ways that modern people can't comprehend. It's one thing to drive across the country today. You know, there are towns and service stations nearby. You can call for help if you break down. But back then, the wilderness was a different world, one where people routinely disappeared and where rescue was a matter of luck. And yet people kept going, pushed by the dream of land ownership and the belief that manifest destiny was on their side. What drew them west was stronger than whatever fears they had about the journey. But the question remains, why risk it? Why subject yourself to years of hardship and danger when there was nothing to gain and everything to lose? Well, the answer is simple, because there was nothing else. Not at least without being willing to live the rest of your life planting cotton or picking it in the brothels of New Orleans. The antebellum South had very little appeal for most Americans, even if it meant spending a decade in the wilderness. And unless you happened to be rich enough to buy one of those fancy steamboats, traveling east was impossible. Stagecoach roads simply couldn't support the kind of traffic, and most rivers weren't navigable by anything larger than a flatboat. Even then, running aground was a real possibility. But trails like the Oregon Trail provided a solution. They may not have been paved with gold, but for many people, they were paved with the promise of an affordable farm and a chance at home ownership. But what really makes the Oregon Trail stand out is the fact that the United States government encouraged people to travel this dangerous journey. Most of the time, that's right. As enticing as manifest destiny was as a philosophy, it didn't mean much without a road to get there. So beginning in 1841, the government began issuing land grants to anyone who successfully reached Oregon Territory, an area claimed by both Britain and America. This policy helped swell the ranks of pioneers, turning a trickle of explorers and fur traders into a flood of settlers. But there was also the political backdrop to consider. In the 1840s, tensions between the United States and Great Britain over the Oregon Territory meant that American settlers' presence was also a statement of sovereignty. The more Americans who moved west, the stronger the country's claim to the land. This added a layer of national pride and urgency to the migration. Families were not just seeking new homes. They were part of a larger story of a nation expanding its borders and ideals. But none of these reasons made the trail easier. For every success story, there were countless tales of struggle. Wagons breaking down far from any help, food supplies dwindling to nearly nothing. The slow, heartbreaking loss of family members to disease and accidents. The vast loneliness of nights spent under unfamiliar stars with only the crackling fire and the distant howls of wolves for company. In the next segments, we'll dive deeper into these hardships, the wagons themselves, the food that sustained travelers, the cruel diseases, and the merciless terrain that made the Oregon Trail one of the toughest journeys in American history. For now, rest in the knowledge that the brave souls who set out did so not out of foolishness, but out of hope. Hope for a better future, but hope, as we'll see, was often tested to its breaking point.